Now that we have completed our, quote, top 50 fantasy books of the last 5 years, I wanted to officially be done having a look back at the last 5 years and now look forward to what we think are going to be the Goodreads Choice Award nominees for 2025. Seeing as we have kind of collectively been looking at a lot of the nominees from previous years, I think it'll be interesting to see if this reshapes how we do our predictions, as taking a look back kind of starts to show certain trends. It starts to show certain authors who are pretty much guarantees for the nominees, and then authors who previously in the past might have been snubbed, but who have kind of made their way into becoming household favorites and becoming a little bit more popular and mainstream. I'm going to try to predict all 20 of the nominees, and I'm going to have 3 alternates just to give myself a little bit of wiggle room, and we'll explain a little bit more as we go through my predictions, which ones I think are also most likely to maybe be bumped out for one of the alternates. And then we'll also have 3 books that I think are the strongest contenders for winning the entirety of the fantasy category. Something to keep in mind is that the Goodreads Choice Award nominees do not begin with books that were released in January, but rather they actually start with books that were released in November. So we're going to be looking at books that came out in November of 2024 all the way through books that are going to be released in November of this year. And this is where it can be a little bit tricky, because I think for a lot of us, we kind of forget books that came out at the end of the previous year. And then also I think we have a tendency to forget about books that are about to be released right before the Goodreads Choice Award nominees actually start. But a lot of times the way that it's gauged is based off of the amount of people that have put these books on their want to read shelves. So it's very likely that books that are going to be coming out the week that the nominees start, there's a good chance that some of those will actually be nominated. In the past, a lot of people have had criticisms about that. What's funny is this year, I know so many people are huge fans of The Will of the Many, and The Strength of the Few, I believe, is going to come out just before the cutoff. And so this year, I think people that might have previously criticized are like, well, The Strength of the Few is probably going to be really good. So it'll be interesting to see if we are as frustrated by that rule or not this particular year. But jumping now into my guess for what I think are going to be the 20 nominees for the Goodreads Choice Award nominees of 2025. First off, one that I have a feeling a lot of people are not going to forget about, even though it came out at the end of last year, and that would be Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. I'll just go ahead and reveal now that I do have it as one of the contenders for being the winner, for 2 reasons. Obviously, Brandon Sanderson is a huge name in fantasy, whether you're a fan or not, and many years his books end up having a decent amount of the votes. There's a couple reasons why, even though it's a contender, I don't necessarily think it's going to win, and that's because it's the 5th in a series. It's the 5th in a really long series, the Stormlight Archive, but on top of that, the further into Stormlight you go, the more it's recommended that you read more of the Cosmere, so that you're in the know about a lot of the crossover that starts to happen. So I think there are a lot of people, even if they're fans of Sanderson, that haven't read this one. And also, I think there are some people that genuinely feel bad voting for something, even if they are a fan of the author and some of their other works. There are a lot of people that feel bad voting for things that they haven't read. Not everybody. We know a lot of people don't feel guilt about that because it's not that serious. It's the Goodreads Choice Award nominee. It's kind of a popularity contest anyway. But I think there are plenty of people that think, I will have to refrain from having my vote within this. On top of all that, this wasn't as well loved as some of the other books in the Stormlight Archive. Of course, there are still people that adore it, but a lot of the fandom felt that some of the previous works in the series were a little bit stronger. All that said, in previous years, I think having the fantasy romance books that were extremely popular, and I would say even more mainstream than a lot of the fantasy books are, when you didn't have them having their own category and they were mixed in, that meant that if there was a year that Sarah J. Maas had a release, she was probably going to win the Goodreads Choice Award nominee. So previous years where Sanderson maybe would have had a little bit more of an edge, Sarah J. Maas beat him out. So I could see some people, though, if I'm looking at this as maybe there's a chance it could win, I could see some people being like, this is the year that Sanderson has a chance to win. And I could see them maybe getting behind it, even if it wasn't even their favorite of the year, or even if it wasn't the one that they liked the most in the series. I will say it's not going to get my vote, but I still could see it getting an enormous amount of the votes. Next up, we have Emily Wilde. So the first 2 books of this series were in the Goodreads Choice Award nominees. So I imagine that this is going to be in there as well. I don't think that suddenly this one's going to drop off, especially it being the end of a series. Sometimes people wait to start a series for the conclusion to be out. So I could see there being people that maybe wouldn't have even had the first 2 books on their want to read shelves, or maybe they did, but then once this one came out, then they were going to read way more of them. Regardless, I don't imagine that the 3rd one's going to get excluded when the first 2 were on the Goodreads Choice Awards in their given years. After that, Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. I do think that if the nominees want to mix it up, it would be kind of interesting if they actually had this in the horror category rather than the fantasy category. I don't actually see them doing that. I think they're going to keep it in fantasy. That's where V. Schwab is kind of known the most, aside from maybe something like young adult. And I think if they were going to mix it up in years past, I would have imagined maybe something like Addie LaRue in fiction instead of fantasy. Not that I'm saying that's how it should be, but I think that they're probably not going to mix it up. Could be an interesting decision, though. Regardless, it's not only a pretty prominent name in the fantasy genre, but it's been quite well received, and it's a standalone, so people don't have to worry about reading something else first. It's not like with Fragile Threads of Power, where it's a series continuation. There's kind of confusion about, do I have to read Shades first? Should I not? I heard I can jump right into it, but other people are recommending that I don't. So there's not any of that going on. And I think it has a decent chance. We haven't gotten a V.E. Schwab standalone really this popular since Addie LaRue. It is actually a contender for me as well. I don't think it's going to win. There is another book that we'll get around to that I think is going to win. But I think people have been really surprised by this one. And I think there are a lot of people that really adored Addie LaRue that they maybe probably went into this one too because maybe they're not as into the more fantasy heavy books like Shades of Magic. So I could see them going from Addie LaRue to this one. It's also, in my opinion, one of V.E. Schwab's best written books. So I think it has a decent chance, though I don't actually think it's going to win. I just think it's going to get a tremendous amount of the votes. The Strength of the Few. This is the one that I believe is going to be coming out right before the cutoff, and I know a lot of people really loved The Will of the Many, and if anything, I think that book has gained more popularity since it came out. So I have a feeling that this one is going to be kind of that underdog. It's going to be one of those books that maybe isn't as mainstream popular, but it's really, really well loved in fantasy circles and in fantasy niches. So I think it's going to get a decent amount of the votes. I don't think, though, it's going to be a contender for the winner. I just don't think it has the same amount of popularity, but I think a lot of people are definitely going to have this one be the one they vote for, especially because when I was doing polls across the top 50, The Will of the Many was the winner of all of those. Brigands and Bread Knives. This is one that, while I think it will be on the list, I also could see it being beat out by one of my alternates, because I think that Travis Baldree's works, I don't think. I know that the first 2 that he has written have been in the Goodreads Choice Award nominees. However, this 3rd one, for me anyway, has been kind of under the radar in comparison. I feel like there was a lot of hype around the first 2. And then this one, even though I believe it'll be coming out in time, I just don't see as many people talking about it. And because part of what leads to the nominations are people's interest ahead of time by using the app and putting it on their want to read, I just don't know if it's been having that occur as frequently. So this one is a maybe, though I do think that if history repeats itself, Travis Baldree is going to be on there again. A Drop of Corruption. The Tainted Cup was on there. It's a well-loved book in fantasy circles. I see no reason why the sequel wouldn't. There are occasions when I think a lot of us are taken aback when sequels aren't. For example, Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne was the only book in the Bloodsworn saga that was in the nominee. The following 2 books were not. So on occasion it does happen, but I don't really see it happening for A Drop of Corruption. I think the hype has been strong enough that it's going to maintain its place. The Devils is Next by Joe Abercrombie. So Joe Abercrombie, I think this one has been hit or miss within his fandom, but it still has an overwhelmingly high average rating. A lot of people have enjoyed it, even if some people didn't love it. And it's decently popular. I don't think he gets the same numbers as Brandon Sanderson, for example. And I don't know that he's as easy to get into as maybe some of Sanderson's works. I think he has a more specific subgenre that he falls into. But I do think that this is something that a lot of people had on their radar. A lot of people were really excited about, especially because it was one of the first things he's written in a long time outside of the First Law world. So I think it's going to definitely make it on the list, but I don't think it's going to be a winner. A little bit of an underdog pick, we have The Raven Scholar. I say underdog because a lot of the previous names that I've been mentioning have been on the Goodreads Choice Awards in the past. A lot of them are really well known. This one I think has kind of come out of nowhere. It's taken a lot of people aback. A lot of people have really enjoyed it. It didn't end up working for me. However, not only do I think it's worked for so many other people, but it's reached a level of popularity in a really short amount of time that makes me think that it's established itself as, at the very least, there are going to be people that are continuously following along with this author's career and what is going to happen with the rest of this series. Plus, while I don't think by any means that it is fantasy romance, I just see it having some crossover appeal to fantasy romance readers and fantasy readers. So I think it has a decent chance of surprising us. I don't think it's going to win, but I think it's going to be getting way more of the votes than a lot of people maybe would expect. After that, we have Empire of Dawn. I have not read any of the books in this series. I just know they're really well loved. I don't think they'll win. I don't think it's going to win. But I'm not as in the know. I have friends that really like this series, and there are other bookish creators who really love this series. I definitely think it's continued to stay hyped ever since the first one has come out. And in fact, maybe it's gained more hype from the beginning. But J. Kristoff, I found, tends to have the following that he does have. They tend to be really passionate about his works. But similar to what I described with Joe Abercrombie's works, I do find that it's a more specific niche. Could be wrong about that, of course. And this is one that I'm thinking maybe I don't know what I'm talking about a little bit. But I definitely think at the very least it's going to be on the list. Next up, Hemlock and Silver. In past years, I think that T. Kingfisher was overlooked. I also think that maybe you could argue that some of her books were snubbed. Now, however, over the last couple of years, not only has this author risen in popularity, but she is starting to become, I think, a household name for a lot of fantasy fans, and she consistently has books in other genre categories as well. So, for example, she has other series that fall under the horror category. It will be really fun to see if she continuously has them. I think she's going to be one of those that is continuously a Goodreads nominee, but I think pretty consistently she's not going to be a winner. I think she's pretty much always going to pop up, though. The last couple of years, she's had that, and I don't see that going away anytime soon. The one that I think is going to win, and it will be really interesting to see if I am wrong, but we have Catabasis by R.F. Kuang. So R.F. Kuang's Yellow Face won in its category in the year that it came out. So we know that this author has a far reach, even outside of fantasy, but also has a huge fan base within fantasy as well, given books like Babel and the Poppy War trilogy are really well loved. So I could see this one winning, and also it's come out just right around when enough people are going to have picked it up. The hype is still there. It's not like it came out earlier and maybe people forgot about it, or maybe now it's kind of overshadowed by another release. It's also not coming out right before. It's not one of those cutoff type of books. So I think that this one has the strongest chance of winning, regardless of whether people even are receiving it well or not. That's kind of the thing about the Goodreads Choice Award nominees, is it's more so, as I said earlier, a popularity contest, not a profound thought, just kind of something I think a lot of us know. So I think this one's going to win. I haven't even read it yet, but just kind of basing off of trends, I think this one has a pretty good chance. After that, The Ragpicker King. So Cassandra Clare's first book in this series, Swordcatcher, was a nominee. I imagine this one's going to be a nominee too. Cassandra Clare is a really big name. The only thing that might prove me wrong with this one is that Cassandra Clare is not as big of a name in adult fantasy spaces, but she's still a really big name overall. So it being a sequel, I don't know. Also, some people that were probably hyped for Swordcatcher maybe dropped off, and if they didn't love that one, they might not continue. But it's Cassandra Clare. I'd be really surprised if it wasn't on the list. After that, The River Has Roots. I haven't read this one. Every single year, there is a book that has gone under my radar, and then once it's gone onto my radar, then all of a sudden I think, how did I miss this? It's one of those books. I think, one, a lot of people really like. This Is How You Win the Time War, I believe is the name of their other work. And also, I I have a feeling that this one, similar to what I was describing with R.F. Kuang, has a little bit more appeal outside of just fantasy circles. I think there are sci-fi fans that are into it. I think there are people that read fiction that are going to be into this author's works. So I think this one has a decent chance of not only making it, but having a decent amount of votes. After that, we have The Dark Mirror. This is by Samantha Shannon. I don't know. This one might be one that gets beat out by one of the alternates. And in fact, one of the alternates is another Samantha Shannon book. So there's a chance. But Samantha Shannon has kind of had a comeback with the Bone Seasons series. I haven't read any of them, so if you have thoughts on that series, feel free to fill me in on it. But I definitely want to give it a go, and it's a long-going series, and it seems pretty well loved. The more books that come out, you tend to have a pretty big drop-off. But this one is pretty far in, and people are still really invested. That's the thing, though. It's so far in that you might lose some people in favor of things like The Devils or Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. You might not get the numbers that those are getting, but I still think it has a chance. Faithbreaker. This one's another one that I think could get beat out, but when I was looking at the average rating, when I was looking at the amount of ratings, and the fact that the previous books in this series haven't really gotten attention, and part of it I think had to do with it being released in the UK first, and then it was having a US release, and I think that kind of messed up its first kind of entry into people's awareness. But with this one, now that it's the third in the series, first off, it's a conclusion. I think a lot of people have had it known to them a little bit more over the last few years, so I think it has a decent chance of being on there, but it is another one that I think might get beat out by an alternate. Next up, we have Gifted and Talented. So this one is an example of what I was describing before, where it doesn't always matter how it's received, because this one I think has a lower average rating, but it is a pretty popular author, and it's an author that has put out a lot of works and has a pretty loyal fan base and is a pretty decently big name. So I think that there's a chance this one's going to be on there too. The Incandescent. Haven't read this one, heard interesting things about it as far as the premise. I believe it's like a dark academia fantasy. I think that the protagonist is a little bit different from what we typically get, and it seems like it's a little bit of a genre bender. It's also one, though, that even though it was an anticipated release of mine, I unfortunately haven't had it at the forefront of my mind as much as some of these others, but I think it still has a pretty fair go. Green Teeth is next. Originally, I didn't think that this one had as strong of a chance, but I actually think it's resonating with a lot of people. It came out early in the year, so more people have had chances to put this on their want-to-read shelf. And on top of all of that, it's put out by Orbit, which is kind of a random thing to state, but I think that Tor and Orbit are two of the bigger names in fantasy spaces, so that kind of lends itself a certain level of like, oh, well, it's an Orbit release, because I know some people are really big fans of that publisher, so I think that that gives it a little bit of an edge too. It's not as big of a name, though, as some of the others. Then we have Isles of Emberdark. I don't know if we'll have two Sanderson books, because I think the rules stipulate that you can have books that are by the same author within a category. They just can't be part of the same series, I think. And I don't know, because if I'm not mistaken, it's technically part of the Cosmere, but it's not part of Store My Archive, so I think it counts. But also, the year that Sanderson had the Secret Projects come out, only Tress was nominated of the Secret Projects. Yumi wasn't, even though I think they were both pretty well liked, and they both came out, if I'm not mistaken, within the time period that would have been within the qualifications for the nominees. So I don't know that we're going to get a second Sanderson. If I had to guess, Wind and Truth would be the one. But Isles of Emberdark is doing quite well for itself. It's also really popular. It's got bigger numbers than some of the other ones on the list, so I think there's a chance it'll appear, but that one's kind of a wild card. Now for my three alternates, we have Queen Demon. I don't really think that Queen Demon's going to make it. It's by Martha Wells. Martha Wells is a really loved author within fantasy and sci-fi spaces. But the first book, it wasn't the most well-loved, and it didn't get all that much hype. It did end up on the Goodreads Choice Award nominees, but I just don't know if its sequel is going to. However, what I was saying about Orbit, and I said Orbit and Tor are two of the more popular ones, so when you see those names, usually that gives it a little bit of an edge, at least from my observations. This one is a Tor release, so I think that's going to give it a chance, especially because also we had the first one. Among the Burning Flames, this is within the other series that this author has written, but once again, it's kind of a offshoot one-off, so we kind of have like a collection of standalones that are all somewhat connected. But I know people really love Priory of the Orange Tree. I think there's a decent chance that this one will appear as well. But what I was saying before about how this author already has a chance with The Dark Mirror, I could see this one beating it out. But I just don't know, because I think a lot of other people are also unsure about, do I read Priory first? Do I read the other one first? Is this actually a good place to start? And I think a lot of people probably have it as they want to read, but I don't know how many people will have actually picked it up by the time that it comes out. And then last for the alternates, we have The Everlasting. This is by Alex E. Harrow, I believe, which, side note, I don't know what it is. I always mix up this author and Tasman Muir, who wrote Gideon the Ninth, and I think it's because one of the books is called Harrow the Ninth, and so I think I just mix up all the names here. But regardless, this author is pretty well liked. They have a pretty good backlist of books that a lot of users are really big fans of. But this one is coming out, I think, right around when the nominees are going to start. So I think that makes it less likely to be as on people's radars. And I do find that what I was describing before about someone like Joe Abercrombie tends to fit a specific kind of fantasy user or fantasy fan. I say user in relation to like Goodreads users. But there are certain people that I think fall into certain subgenres more often than not. And I almost feel like this author has more appeal to fiction readers and a certain kind of fantasy reader. But then there are other fantasy readers, like the ones that might be more likely to pick up The Devils or Brandon Sanderson's works, that on average, maybe this isn't their kind of fantasy. So I don't know. And also, I could be completely off the mark with that assessment, but I think it has a chance. It's just it coming out so soon before. I think that kind of gives it a disadvantage. Editing L here, a couple of things to note that are going to be clarifications on a few things, a few books that I didn't mention in the main part of the video that I want to make sure I do mention, and then something else that I want to take note of, and I actually feel like The Everlasting is the perfect launching off point. So The Everlasting I could also see being considered under the romantasy umbrella, just from a little bit I've heard of it. I haven't had a chance to pick it up just yet, so I don't know for sure if I think that's the proper place for it. But there are a few other books that I think are going to appear somewhere on the nominees. I just don't know if they're going to appear under fantasy. And another example of one that might actually be in romantasy would be Watermoon. This has been very successful. Another example of where this has kind of reached a more mainstream audience is if you go to the Barnes & Noble website. A lot of times it's listed under one of their best books of the year. So I do think it's going to appear. I just don't know for sure if it's going to appear under fantasy, though I do think that it rides that line well enough that I could see it in fantasy, but I could also see it in the romantasy category. I also wanted to take note of Alchemy of Secrets by Stephanie Garber. She is a huge name. Her books always do really well for themselves, and this is her adult fantasy debut, but I think that this one might also end up in romantasy over fantasy, but if it doesn't, I don't know that that's necessarily incorrect. I just think it is, once again, similar to something like Emily Wilde. You could see it going either direction. The same could be said for Alchemized. I think a lot of fans of Alchemized have tried to really put out there that the book is tackling a lot of really heavy themes and that it's a war story first and a romance second. But I think enough people still associate this one with romance, and also I think the readership still falls more under the romance category. And then a few that I hadn't mentioned that I think there is a possibility of them appearing on the list, or at the very least they would fall under my alternates category. We have Red City by Marie Lu. I really think this one has a better chance than I gave it credit for. I just didn't have it in my mind necessarily as prominently because it only just came out. So otherwise, I think if it had come out earlier, I would have been a little bit more aware of it. We also have the newest Witcher book, which I know a lot of people probably have put this on their want to read shelves. And obviously the Witcher fan base is very, very big. However, because there is some confusion about, wait, is this a sequel? Is this a prequel? It looks like it's listed as a prequel, but should I still read the other books first? I don't know if it's going to have the same amount of wide mainstream appeal that some of the other fantasy books do. And then also, Witcher is very popular, but the Witcher books don't always get as much recognition, unfortunately, even though they're actually the source material. That's still something that people are surprised by, because I think a lot of people are still under the impression that the video games are the source material. Regardless, I don't know if it's going to show up. I could see it showing up, but I don't think that Witcher has really gotten a whole lot of love in years past, and I don't know that that's going to be any different this year. I also completely missed the book that held her heart. This is well into the series. I believe it's the third installment in the series, but Mark Lawrence is a fairly prominent name in fantasy, but just not quite on the same level that some of the really, really popular ones are, which is why it kind of escaped my notice, but I know it is very well loved by the fans of that series. And then last we have The Ashfire King. The first book in this series was a Goodreads nominee, but this second book kept getting pushed back. So a lot of people have had it on their want to read. They've just had it on their want to read for a while, and then it's finally officially come out, but I think a lot of people have forgotten about it. It could pop up, but I just don't know if it's going to beat out some of the other ones. It could, though. It could surprise a lot of people and show up on the list. I'll recap the ones that I think have the strongest chance of winning. We have Wind and Truth, Bury Our Bones, and Catabasis, which I think is going to be the one that wins. I think I might be surprised with the Jay Kristoff one. I don't see too many others that I think are going to give these a run for their money, because I just don't think they have the popularity that these ones do. Very curious to know, though, what books do you think I completely overlooked and that you think, how did you miss this one? There's no way this isn't on the list. What's a book that you're almost positive is going to be snubbed and you wish more people would give a chance and know it exists? And then what do you think is going to be the winner of the fantasy category? Also, let me know if you have any predictions or books that you thought were great from other genres or other age ranges. And then I didn't mention debut, but if there's any debut works that are fantasy or maybe just ones that you think were great from other genres, feel free to mention those as well. I think debuts is a fun category because it's just so exciting to see authors who are just starting their careers off. And it's fun to see which ones are making a big splash in the literary space. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.